Okay, so today I'm going to be talking about submersible well pumps. Stay Right is a brand we've currently been selling. I like them. They seem like they're pretty good pumps. So far, so good. We haven't had any issues with them. So far as I can tell, we're going to be keeping them for the foreseeable future. This catalog is super handy. If you don't have one, try to get one. I mean, all this information is available online on the Pentair website, but it's much easier if you have it all condensed in this one packet like this. So if you don't have one, try to get one. So I've got this page marked. This is actually page 50 in the catalog. These pump curves correspond to the pumps that we're currently stocking. So you've got these pump curves here, kind of like a graph that shows a gallon per minute at a certain head and feet. We're not really going to use that to size the pump. What the chart you really need to be using is this one here, because it lists PSI ranges as well as depth and your expected gallons per minute at the wellhead. That's what you need to be concentrating on. So let's just say, as an example, at 100 foot of depth, you can run your finger down the chart right here. So this is talk like a half horsepower pump, because at 100 feet, a half horsepower is typically what you're going to be looking for. So at 50 psi, you're looking at 6 gallons per minute. At 40, you're looking at 8.2. At 30, 9.9. But that's kind of the range of the gallons per minute you're going to be getting out of this pump at 100 feet on a half horsepower 7-stage. And talking about stages, well pump motors turn at a constant rate. If it's rated at half horse, whatever RPM that half horse is at, that pump's always turning at that same RPM. Stages are kind of like, the best analogy I can think of is like an automatic transmission. Like the impeller kind of ramps up and ramps back down depending on the load and how much head it's fighting and how much demand there is. But the actual pump motor itself stays consistent. The torque stays the same. But in our example of 100 feet, a half horse is plenty. You don't need any more than that. So I've got a whole bunch of stuff laid out over here, so we're going to kind of start at the bottom and work our way up to the top. I didn't actually pull the pump out because they're heavy and I'm by myself and I'm filming this with the phone and I'm lazy, so sue me. But on the top of the pump, there's a check valve built into the pump. I like to do this instead. This here is a check valve, an additional check valve. The Simmons 617 SB. What's neat about this one, 1.25 inch male by 1 inch female. That'll thread right into the pump, and you can put an extra long male adapter, 1 inch, right into this thing. Put that into the top of the pump, boom, you're ready to roll. I strongly prefer these extra long adapters, even on a shallow well, like a 100-foot well. It just buys you insurance, because you do not want to lose that thing inside that well casing. That is a big problem. Not a good thing. But what this does, just having that extra check, you can see it right there, having the secondary check valve, which actually this will be the primary check valve, the one at the pump won't actually be doing anything with this one installed. It buys you time, because pulling well pumps sucks. You don't want to have to do it any more than often you have to. The pumps are expensive. It's very expensive to have it done. We're trying to avoid that. So this buys you service life. Because once the check valves fail and the line loses its prime, the pump has to fight that every time it cuts on. And sometimes the pump will run continuously. Because of that, because it keeps losing pressure at the well tank up at the top. So very good thing to add. And they're not much more money. I mean, because you're going to have to bushing it down anyway. This is maybe 10 more bucks versus a standard bushing. It's a no-brainer in my opinion. So that's going to be on top of your pump. And then you're going to run typically you're going to run 1 inch high density polyethylene or black roll pipe, whatever you want to call it, from here all the way up to the wellhead. Okay. On these extra long male adapters, 2 clamps facing in opposite directions. Some guys will put 3 on them, but you only really need 2. Any more than that's kind of overkill, because I don't know if you've ever worked with polyethylene pipe before, you'll know that the barbs are actually larger than the OD of the inside of the pipe. So unless you push like a man, you have to heat the pipe up to get these things on. especially the extra long ones. They're you just about have to beat them in with a hammer if you don't heat the pipe up first. You're supposed to use a heat gun. You can use a torch. You're not really supposed to. You weaken the pipe if you overheat it, but there you go. At the pump itself, you're going to need a heat shrink kit. So you want to make your splices with on your wire. Now, as far as installing these, the most important thing is to put these on the wire before you actually make your splice, because then if you have to cut the splice out if you don't. So it's a kind of a rookie mistake. It's easy to do. It's not a half bad idea to put a little bit of dielectric grease on that electrical connection, or wrap it with vinyl tape before you actually shrink this down. You want to keep as much moisture and water out of that thing as possible. You don't want that connection to corrode, because if it does, it can increase the resistance and it can cause the pump to burn up. So it'll pull too many amps. It can trip breakers, all kinds of crazy stuff. And as far as sizing the wire, what I was taught is, generally speaking, 200 feet and less, you're fine with 12 gauge. Once you go above 200 feet, depending on the horsepower of the pump, you need to start considering 10 gauge. If you go, and definitely more than 300 feet, this is a good idea to go ahead and step up to 10 gauge. But it depends on the horsepower rating of the pump and what your demand is. Like if you're putting a really high horsepower pump in a shallow well, you should probably still put 10 gauge on it. It's kind of situational, but typically I would say 99% of the time, almost every time, probably never, 12 gauge is fine. Yeah, fun times. So talking about the wire, we keep these little guys here. These are called cable guards. They're neat looking, I guess. I mean, you run your cable through one side, and you can run your pump rope through the other side. And I'll talk about pump rope in a second. And you got these little tabs you can knock off. Like by default, it's designed for 1 inch. You can knock that first tab and do 1.25 inches, or the second tab and do 1.5 inches. They're kind of neat, but vinyl tape is fine. 2 or 3 wraps of vinyl tape every 10 feet or so, you're good. You don't need to go crazy here. You might be able to sell these. I don't think I've ever actually sold one, and I've definitely never used one. So it is what it is. Now, talking about pump rope, a lot of guys don't use pump rope. Your pros that have the equipment to pull a pump without a whole lot of problems, they generally don't buy pump rope because it's an added cost. It's extra money. It's not the cheapest thing. It's not super expensive either. Every pump I've ever pulled or ever installed, I put pump wire on it, or pump rope on it, excuse me. Reason being, you go to pull that thing, you got dry pipe, you're up in the top of the casing, you're pulling, everything's going great. Hey, this isn't so bad. Hey, I got good traction. And then you get to the spot where the pipe was in the water. Now you're fighting because the pipe's slick. You can't really get any grip on it. You can't get traction on it. And the pipe, because of the diameter of it, especially if you're pulling it by yourself, you don't really have a way to get leverage on it. With pump rope, you can wrap it around your hand, pull, use your offhand, wrap it around, pull, go back and forth hand over hand. You can get that joker out. Makes it a whole lot easier. And also too, it gives you something when you're installing your well head into your well casing, while you're getting all that set up and put together, it gives you a way to tie the pump off to something just in case you lose control of it. That way you don't drop it into the well casing. So pump rope, at least offer it. A lot of people won't buy it, but it's a good thing to keep in mind. So let's talk about the well head. I built one here. This is what I typically call well head. I like to see this thing to be made entirely of brass, if at all possible. And I actually am out of 1-inch males right now for some reason that I cannot currently explain, but that's okay. So extra long male again. We don't keep these in female, unfortunately, so I have to do a coupling. 1x6 nipple, 1-inch T, 1-inch male, standard length. This is a 1x3/4 bushing and a 3/4 boiler drain. Okay. And again, 2 clamps opposite each other. On the short one here, especially because it's not holding any weight, one clamp's plenty. You don't need to do two clamps here. The shorter barb, one clamp is plenty for that. No need to do two. It's no point in that. Inside the actual well seal, the lip of this T is what supports everything. Everything rides right here. Okay, once you put it in the actual seal itself. The purpose of this boiler drain is to give you a bypass. So when you first set everything up and you first wire it and get power to it and you cut the pump on for the first time and try to prime it, you want to open this up, because all that dirt and grime, all that trash that's inside that well casing is going to want to go up here, and it's going to want to go into your pressure vessel or your well tank. Inside your tank T, inside the tank, and there, and it's going up in the house, and now you got to change all your aerators. It's no good. No good. We don't want that. So what this does is it gives you a purge point before all that. So you just hook a garden hose up to it, crack it open, let it run. You don't want to go too crazy. You don't want to run the well dry, because that's just as bad as having dirt in it to start with. But you let it run for a while just to get the worst of it out. Good thing to have. You don't have to have it. You can put a 90 here and just eliminate that. That's fine. There is another boiler drain in this setup, but this is how I do it. This is what I do. So you run this. So you run a line from here, and you can also do PEX right here too. You don't necessarily have to do polyethylene right here. You can definitely convert to PEX from this point. There's nothing wrong with that. And also, speaking about PEX, no PEX. No. Not allowed. No. You don't want to run PEX here. PEX is not rated for that. PEX can support a pretty significant amount of weight, especially 1 inch. Like 1 inch crimps are actually pretty doggone strong. You can pick up water heaters with them. But not in the long haul, I wouldn't trust it. I've had people ask me if they can do that before, and no. This is what you need. But up here, it's fine. Once you get above ground, PEX all day. As long as it's not being exposed to sunlight, you don't want PEX exposed to sunlight, but you can use PEX from this point. Let's see, what else can we talk about before we move on to the well seal? Actually, let's talk about torque arresters. I actually took this one out of the bag and put it together, so if you guys can kind of see, I had a scrap piece of 1 inch sitting in my car. So this is 1 inch PVC. This will work on a whole bunch of different sizes of pipe. So when you take this thing out of the bag, it's going to be stretched out. It's going to actually be a lot longer than that. Put the first clamp on the lower spot, kind of get it tight. Put the second clamp on, and then you want to compress it, which causes these veins to spread out, and then tighten it down. And you want it to be just the right size to fit inside the well casing. So there's some adjustability there. It depends on what size well casing you have. So what does this thing do? What does this weird looking doohickey do? Okay, so I've actually done a little additional research in addition to what I was taught when I still did the trade full time. So you don't really need this most of the time. So the theory is, and it's not really a theory, it is a thing, your pump motors run counterclockwise, okay? These are clockwise threads. Or at least I'm pretty sure they are. They're right-hand thread. But anyway, it's relatively rare. I've never seen it happen, but my understanding from my research is that this can actually back out of the pump because of the torque. Because what happens is that motor kicks on. That pump, it's going to move a little bit. Not much, but just a little bit. And on a higher horsepower pump over time, apparently that can back that fitting out if you don't torque it properly, which, if you crank down on that thing, it ain't coming out. But that's one reason why you might. Now, on a really big pump, like a 3 horsepower submersible, or even bigger than that, they do come bigger than that. That's a lot of torque. Okay, torque arrestor's a great idea. But for your typical residential use, half horsepower, 3/4 horsepower, even a 1 horsepower, you don't really need this. My rule of thumb has always been, if it's at least a 1 horse, you probably do want to have one of these. If it's a 1.5 horse, You definitely want to have one of these. If it's anything bigger than a horse and a half, you must have one of these. Makes sense, right? Uh, it's also not a half bad idea to put two on these on a really high horsepower pump. You can do that. You can put two of them. Typically, the way I was taught to put them in, this gap I have here, it's roughly 8 inches or so. Just imagine it's polyethylene pipe instead, and this is sitting on top of it. 6 to 8 inches off the check valve. That's about where you want it. You can mount it a little bit closer if you want to, but it's fine. You just something like that, or you want a little bit of a gap there. Second purpose it serves, it kind of helps keep things in alignment. So when you're feeding, because when a well is punched, it's not a perfectly straight line. Those drills, they tend to walk as they go down. So what this can help do, especially on flexible pipe, it kind of helps guide the pump down the casing. It can make it a little bit easier to actually feed the pipe into the casing. And the third thing it does is it keeps the pump from kicking back and forth inside the casing when it kicks on and off. Again, that's more of a high horsepower problem. Your typical residential pump is not going to really move very much, but there is a case to be said that if you're using high density polyethylene, it is flexible. If you're using PVC, it's stiff versus flexible. Maybe one moves more than the other. I mean, I haven't done the research to know whether that's the case or not, but this keeps it from beating up the casing. Pretty good idea. And one neat thing, if you get this adjusted just right, so you can go to slide this into the casing, you won't be able to. It'll slide in nice and smooth, but as soon as you try to spin it either side, you won't be able to. It'll be just, if you get it adjusted right. So it might take you a try or two. I mean, not you're the one selling it, but for the customer. But that's what it looks like when it's assembled. So I know they look kind of weird out in the box, and you may not know what they are supposed to look like, but there you go. So let's talk about the seal. And let me grab this guy too, because this is part of it. All right, so I grabbed a cast iron seal. Me personally, I prefer cast over ABS. I think it's stronger. I think it's going to last longer. But the ABS is fine. So this is a 6x1. That means it's meant for a 6-inch casing, 1-inch pipe. So you'll run your your 1-inch brass nipple will come through right there. And that T, top of that lip of that T, will rest on top of that right there. That's what holds it all together. And when you take these bolts loose, that takes the tension off of this thing. There's a gasket right there. When you torque these bolts down, that gasket gets squished, and that's what holds this thing into that casing. So you loosen all this up, it gets a little bit easier. So the thing that's kind of tricky about putting one of these in, you'll pre-assemble this part right here, and this part won't actually be attached to the wellhead yet, so you'll have to run this up through the casing, pull it up high enough where you can hold on to it, set the casing down, tighten the casing down, and then put your T on. So it can be kind of tricky to do that solo, but it's not a huge deal. So on this one, you got 2 ports. You got this little guy right here, and you got this little bit bigger guy right here. That's your vent. And all these kits, that's just a little blue plastic plug. Nothing crazy. The only 9 times out of 10, you're fine plugging that. Most people don't need a vent. If you have a lot of sulfur in the water, or any other thing like that, they can off gas from the water, you're going to need some kind of vent. But most people don't have that problem, so they're fine to go ahead and cap that. But if they do need to have it open, you don't want to have it just sitting open like that. You want to use one of these guys here. It's a well vent, and you can see it's got these little notches cut in the side, and that's just so you can put this guy in there, and it still lets air come and go as needed, so you don't build up a positive or negative pressure in the casing, but it also keeps critters from getting in there. You don't want bugs falling in, Gross. You don't want to drink that. The second port right here. So this thing comes with a smooth bushing, and what you'll do, depending on what you're running through here, this is where you're going to run your power from, or your pump rope. You're going to run one or both through here. And the kit comes with a couple different these little washers. That's got a circle in it. This has got a kind of a slot. Just whichever one of these is going to work out best for you is what you'll use, or you don't even have to use one. You can just use what's there. It's fine. It's all good. And once you get it all in there, you'll run this guy down in. And all this little smooth bushing does is it gives you kind of a smooth surface so that your pump rope and their wire don't rub against this metal right here. Because I can feel it. It's got kind of a it's not super sharp, but it does have a jagged edge there. That can cause problems. You don't want to fray anything. So that's nice and smooth and soft. Well, it's not soft, but you get what I'm saying. That's what that's for. Just put that back. Don't lose it. So once you get the wellhead set up, now you got to worry about your tank and your tank tee. This is an 1.25 inch tank tee. We also keep 1 inch. And let's talk about pressure vessels for a moment. So most people are going to do a 20-gallon pressure vessel, which is fine. Me personally, I try not to sell any less than a 34, or even better, a 44. Most of your well guys, they're going to do 20s all day long because they're cheap. They can charge the same amount for it, and they make more money. So I get that, but there are a lot of benefits to stepping up to a bigger pressure vessel, because one, it gives you a larger amount of standby or water in the tank itself. Your drawdown, so it takes you longer to draw it down, which means your pump doesn't have to run as much. It's that's a good thing, because the less that pump runs, the longer it's going to live, and pulling a pump sucks, so you don't want to have to do that. That's more or less the gist of it. Also, the bigger tank also gives you more consistent performance over the period of drawdown. Like your pressure drop as you draw it down is going to be more gradual, so it's less noticeable whenever you bottom it out and the pump has to kick on high. So you get better performance overall. Pretty cool. So why do we have two tees? Okay, the 20-gallon tank uses a 1 inch tee. Pretty much every other tank is going to use 1.25 inch. So you got an 1.25 inch male on this side. And on your inlet and outlet, look at that. 1.25 inch male by 1 inch female. And these are both 3/4 female. On the 1 inch tee, these will actually be 1/2 inch. So that's what a tank tee looks like. This particular example is brass. We also keep them in stainless. I believe the brass is actually slightly cheaper, and I personally think it's better to use brass in this application. So we'll set that to the side for a second. The boiler drain. It's good to have this in there too. It's good to have extras. Comes with pressure relief valve. This is absolutely critical. This has to be installed. Without this, you're playing with fire, okay? You have to have one of these, and it has to be working. See, there's that little spring in there. There's like a stopper that's under spring tension. Pressure gets too high in that vessel, that spring it'll overcome that spring tension. It'll start leaking. It'll let that pressure off. You have to have this, okay? I haven't personally witnessed it happen, but I have seen the aftermath of one of those malfunctioning. What had happened was a customer of my uncle, back when I worked for him, maybe, 3 years ago, his relief valve started leaking. It was a trickle. It wasn't bad. He thought he'd be smart and just take it out. It's fine. Just take it out. You don't need that. It's leaking. Put a cap in it. Okay. So about maybe 2 days after he did that, his well house blew up. And it blew out all of his fixtures. So I got to repipe his house and change every fixture in his house and completely rebuild his entire, everything in his well house. It was a disaster. Like I wouldn't have believed it if I hadn't seen it myself. It actually ruptured a tank. It was wild. Like it did, like if somebody threw a hand grenade inside that well house, and it blew out every one of all the supply lines. It blew all those out. It made a humongous mess. But what happened in his particular example, and we'll talk a little more detail about this guy in a second, but his points inside his switch got stuck on. The pump was running nonstop. I mean, when he cut the power to it to take that thing out and put the cap in, okay, the power's off. It's not going to run. Big whoop. So it was all burned up, so I'm not exactly sure what caused it to get stuck. Maybe a critter got in there and caused it to short, or maybe the springs failed one of the springs failed in it, and it got stuck closed. But that thing ran and ran and ran and ran and ran and ran, and he was home, and I think his wife worked third shift, so they were using water just often enough to keep the pressure from completely blowing that thing up until that last day. I think she had the day off, so they both slept in. They wake up to a flooded house because all their supply lines blew off. Yeah. But way this thing works, we'll go ahead and talk about it. Why not? By default, these packages come with a 30-50 switch or 50-30. I always get the order mixed up. Anyway, it's high-low. There are 4 contacts in here. And there's 2 springs, two preloaded springs. So it's your hot coming in, your neutral coming in, hot going out, neutral going out. They're all together in like banks of 2. And there's a spot on here for your ground, for your power coming in. And these pumps, I forgot to mention that these pumps are 2-wire, so you don't have a ground going to the pump itself. Your ground's actually in here. Okay, you're going to use your tank T package as your ground. So the springs inside of here, sometimes people will take these things and they'll torque them down or they'll loosen them and monkey with them, thinking they can get better pressure. Yeah, that's a good way to make it not work. If you want more pressure, get a 60-40. That's your answer. I know how to adjust these. I've been taught how. Even I screw them up sometimes, especially when they're old. You don't really want to mess with them. They're cheap. Just get a new one. Come on, guys. What else is in here? Oh, gauge. Comes with a gauge. Just a basic gauge. It's not a glycerin filled, but it's fine. It works. And a little nipple that goes in the bottom of here. I believe that is a 1/4x4, if I remember right, just to get it up out of the way. So yeah, that's the tank T package. So let's go back to the actual T itself. So this end goes into the bottom of the tank. Over here, this can be in or out. That can be in or out. It doesn't matter which way you put it. Same thing here. You put your gauge on one side. You put your points or your switch on one side. Doesn't matter which one. And then on the front, there's 3/4 threads. You can put your relief on one side. You can put the boiler drain on the other. Back and forth. Doesn't really matter. As long as long as all the ports are used. That's all you really care about. And like I said, once you get to this point, you can run PEX here, and you can run PEX to the house, or you can run high density polyethylene all the way to the house. That's fine, no big deal. You just can't use. It's just once you turn up inside the house, you have to convert to PEX by code. I don't believe you're allowed to use high density polyethylene once you get above ground, and underneath the crawl space or into the slab. I'd have to review my code on that, but I'm pretty sure that's the case. Anyway, you can do PEX there. It's fine. So yeah. That more or less covers it. About the only other thing I can think of, closing thoughts. We'll walk for a second. Talking about that well vent, another option, sulfur removal system, PRSRS. Oops. So each kit comes with a little bit of that tubing. Comes with one of these guys. Remember that boiler drain that we put at the top of the wellhead? Whoop! You'll thread it onto there. You kind of orient it whatever works about best for you. And it's got a little push fit on there. And on the other end, you'll need, I believe it is a 1/2 by 1/4 bushing on this end. And it's got a push fit right there. And there's a tiny little mister. I'm catching a reflection, but you might can make it out. There's a little orifice right there, like a mister. So that sits down inside of that well vent, and it's connected here to your boiler drain. So what you do is you crack that boiler drain open, runs water through that loop, and it gets misted out through here. And what that does is that sulfur in the water, it causes it to settle down, basically. Puts it back into suspension. Excuse me. So that helps eliminate the smell. It doesn't get rid of the sulfur. The sulfur's still there. It's still there. But because it's back in suspension, it cuts down the smell. Genius. Absolute genius. The only other thing I can think of, as far as kind of looping back around to the reason for the season, you know, sizing your pump, the biggest, one thing you need to think about is the distance of the well house to the actual residence. Typically, you don't have to worry about that, and there's a lot of factors involved. It's really kind of beyond the scope of this video, but say, you know, if you're 100 feet away, that's not really far enough to worry about it. If they're 200 feet away, now we need to start thinking about friction loss. We definitely need to start thinking about friction loss. If they're 300 or 400 feet away, I really want to know what size piping you're running, and I really want to know how, you know, is it uphill, is it downhill? Because you may, depending on how those circumstances work out, you may actually need to step up to a larger pump than what that pump chart says, because you got to remember, go back to my example here, at 50 psi on a half horse at 100 feet, you're getting 6 gallons per minute at the wellhead. That's very important to remember. It's at the wellhead. That's what you should expect. So if you're pumping, if the well house is 1,000 feet from the house and they're running 1-inch pipe, that 60 gallons per minute is going to be more like, well, I don't know off the top of my head. It's going to be a whole lot less than that. It probably won't be enough at that point. So the customer either needs to run a significantly larger pipe, like for that run, I'd say at least 2-inch, honestly, maybe 1.5 inches, to overcome that friction loss, and possibly, or might want to step up to the next size pump in addition to doing that. See what I'm saying? There's never one solution to a problem. There's always multiple things to consider. So, you know, use your best judgment, ask questions, do research, reach out, do what you got to do. Get the customer what they want, make them happy, get them to come back. That's pretty much all I have for this. Guys, if you ever need advice on how to do anything like this, reach out. Just ask me. It's all good. This is kind of one of my things. Hope you learned something. I know this went on for close to 30 minutes. Actually, wow, 33 minutes so far. Okay. I'm going to quit talking now because I'm probably lost half of you at this point, but I hope you enjoyed what you saw. Hope you learned something, and have a good one.